welcome. The next kosha we're going to be looking at is the manomaya kosha, and this is the level of the intellect and conscious mind. It's the level of conscious thoughts, and sometimes just under the surface. This kosha has a huge effect on us because it has such a large effect, right, on our perceived experience. And because the mind is so powerful, it can affect all the other koshas really dramatically. So you could think of manomaya kosha as the pivotal centerpiece in the kosha model, right? That has a lot of influence. So when this level of us is functioning well, the mind, right, regulates, directs, and helps the physical and energetic states by influencing how we deal with input. For example, we may make different choices about our lifestyle, diet, exercise, etc., based on our perception of the things that are coming into us. So in order to do this and serve our highest needs and intentions at the same time, the mind needs to be open to learning and plastic. So in order to make conscious decisions properly, we need as much information as possible. A closed mind stops changing, it loses its plasticity, and eventually causes disease in its own kosha or others, right, across the system. But most importantly, probably, this kosha needs to be open and clear, right, so that information and input can pass seamlessly and clearly through all the koshas, from kosha to kosha. So, ideally that's happening as opposed to the mind getting in the way, which is often the case. So it's a common mistake in our society to put our health in the hands of other people. But of course, other educated people besides ourselves, right, have much to share with us in terms of health and healing. But that said, to believe that we are not responsible for our own health and healing is a real mistake. So as yoga therapists, we're primarily educators. And just as we educate our clients on how to move and breathe, right, we must also educate our clients on proper use of the mind for the health benefits they're seeking. So to really understand the power of this kosha, one could look at studies of the placebo effect, right? Often people will get the intended effect of a drug in studies where they believe it to be real, even though it's a sugar pill. Now, this doesn't mean that drugs don't work, or even though those drugs didn't work, but what you can really take from that is how powerful the mind is and how much the conscious mind, this kosha, right, can influence the other koshas in a similar way. Therefore, it's really important, right, that we work with the mind in the disease process. So there's two ways we work within this kosha. One is education on how the mind works, and in this course we're going to be looking at that through the Yoga Sutras. It's really important to understand the nature of the mind and then techniques to work with it. The other possibility is through chanting and working with the chakra model to educate the mind and keep it plastic, especially, right, open to change. So those are the two ways I've learned, I've used in my practice, both with some success. But with any kosha, working primarily, with this kosha for a disease may or may not work. You might have to involve the other koshas. I have, however, seen some really helpful shifts, especially in mentally ill clients, when gaining a little more clarity on the workings of the mind from a yogic perspective. The shame that people have of a mind that is giving us problems, is common, but understanding the mind as an instrument and the creator of sort of our own reality really helps ease this. So the same person who's shamed by their mind's nature, right, would probably never be ashamed of a misbehaving arm or leg, right? But once, that person understands that the mind can be understood and worked with the same or similar kind of detachment that we might with our bodies, then things can get really easier for people. So in some ways, we can say that motivation and discipline, right, around this are up to the client. And to an extent, that's true. But what if, that's a major part of the disease or problem, right? What if disordered thinking causes us not to treat ourselves well? Or what if conflicting thoughts and emotions are getting in the way of decision making? So it's our job on some level, right, to help clients understand that they can work and understand their own mind, and that can help them ease their suffering, which might not always be obvious to them. So I found this to be really the case a lot in my personal work with eating disorders. I found that it comes to play once the mind is calm, so that we can work with the mind directly. We're going to look at the Yoga Sutras, how you can work with them yourself and with other people. So I look forward to working on this kosha, a pivotal kosha. It allows us to delve deeper into the koshas that could be considered below it, the wisdom body and the bliss body. We are continuing our look at the sutras. We're going to be looking at chapter 1 today. Again, it's important to sort of take in the sutras because it will help guide you in session and with how to work with your clients. I think it's pretty important to have an understanding. And what I'm giving you here is a sort of fast-paced, right, review, sort of cliff notes of how you might look at the sutras and how you might have them, in your mind. So what the main things you'd want to be thinking about are. Chapter 1 goes directly at the mind, its nature, and how to deal with it. It's both descriptive, of course, and practical. Generally, the chapter is focused on the practice of Samadhi, which is being immersed in higher consciousness. I look at that as being useful because, it reminds us that higher states, right, are you could say a possibility, or you could even say should be part of our normal working. So not that we necessarily would need to be in higher states all the time, but sort of achieving this higher perspective on a regular basis is extremely useful in balancing to the system. So you could look at it that way. And of course, higher samadhis and like sort of bigger, what you might call spiritual experiences are possible, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm saying more the glimpses and moments in our lives where we see things, right, for what they actually are in, using the full range of our mind's potential. So I suggest while listening to this lecture, you might want to have your Yoga Sutra book, this Mukunda Styles version, which I'm using here, with you. This is my copy that I'm using while we do this. I've had this for a long time. And again, there's other great translations, and it's great to compare them. I think this one is very elegant, and that's why we're using it. Very elegant and simple. So it begins, offering yoga instruction. That's sort of a offering for the whole book. And then we get to 1-2, yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha, which is, sort of, you might say, the most famous yoga sutra. The translation here is yoga is experienced in that mind which has ceased to identify itself with its vacillating waves of perception, which is a perfect way to put it. I think, another way to say that in a way would be yoga is achieved when our thoughts bother us less. When working with people and ourselves, it's important to keep this in mind, right? Like that's our goal, where the vacillations of perception or the thoughts, are less of a disturbance. And it leads us, to the conclusion that, it's not exactly that the thoughts are a problem. Our goal is to widen our perspective so that we're not having interactions with them that are problems. The sutras go on to tell us, this is Sutras 1, 3, 4, and 5. It says, when this happens, then the seer is revealed, resting in its own essential nature, and then at all other times, the self appears to assume the form of thoughts, vacillations, and the true self is lost. And then the next one too, what this is about here is, it goes on to tell us how yoga allows us to see the true nature of things and not the cloudy reflection of the nature of things that our mind may think it is. And that's basically what, as you get past 3, 4, and 5, going 6, 7, 8, it's talking about vacillations of the mind and sources of correct understanding. There's lots of details in all of these that are really interesting to a spiritual practitioner. In terms of therapeutics, I think it's important to understand that one fact, that a lot of times that our perception is a reflection that is not as accurate as we'd like it to be. And that's a problem. And that inaccuracy causes us to take action or maybe feel things that are not beneficial to our system. So, of course, we want a remedy. And the remedies here is 112. The vacillating waves of perceptions, for those of you who are interested in this kind of thing, the vrittis, right? So vrittis are thought patterns, are still through consistent, earnest practice and dispassionate non-attachment. So this is our remedy, practice and non-attachment. And that's what chapter 1 is suggesting to us. And then 113 here is talking about practice. And really, it's saying practice the attempt to see things through the lens of the true self or the bigger picture. And that this is a struggle, and that being a struggle is actually normal. And I can't tell you, even if I'm not directly referencing the sutras, to a client, I can't tell you how many times I've used this concept that it is very normal for humans to struggle, right? And our job, right? It's okay in your path or your progress when you're trying to get from A to B mentally, for it to be hard, and that's not really a problem. And then when 14 talks about it being firmly grounded when it's pursued incessantly with reverence for a long time. So basically, this seeing things through the lens of the true self, right, bigger picture, becomes more natural the longer we do it. And another way to say that could be, right, it's good for us to stop our magical thinking that everything it will change if I just X, Y, or Z. That this is a process and it takes some time. Practice here, right, is the work that we need to do. And then grace, the idea here that grace descends, these aha moments happen when we are practicing. So we don't create, right, these big changes that magical thinking has. We don't actually make them happen. We set up the conditions so that we can see clearly. And that's what we need to take from that. Then when we go to 115, we start talking about non-attachment. Now, it says here that non-attachment is both a mastery of consciousness, right, where one is free of craving, is how he puts it. So this is both a point of view, right, like my cravings and desires are not necessarily what needs to guide me. So that's more of an idea, right? And it's also a practice, right? Mindfulness of cravings will lead to their power being reduced. By acknowledging, I am craving things to be different, I feel anxious, I feel upset, and I don't like it, right? By acknowledging these feelings and thoughts and vrittis, right, and sitting still with these, and their, accompanying the vrittis themselves and their accompanying emotions, we gain power over our conscious mind. And that's what they're talking about in 115 and 16. So we have these two practices, like practice, right, and non-attachment. And then when we get to 116, it's talking about the ultimate state of non-attachment. And I think really here it's, it goes on to remind us, since everyone is part of the larger whole, right, the very idea that our individual perception is more important than that of another is like fundamentally flawed. And if we master non-attachment, we'll experience a deep sense of well-being because everything is just as it should be. And we've all experienced that, actually. And what this is talking about is making that more common, and then from an enlightenment perspective, like happening all the time. But for our purposes, we're really looking at trying to make this something that we're aware of when it does happen, and then actually make it happen more, right, by working with this practice of mindfulness, right, and also this point of view. And I'd like us to skip ahead to 121 and 122. So 121 and 122 here, for those who have an intense urge for spirit and wisdom, it sits near them waiting. And then 22 says, for those who have an urge of varying degrees, mild, moderate, or intense, right, there are distinctions in their sense of closeness to spirit. This is important because it's reminding us that people are different in terms of their desire to be immersed in a wider perspective of the self. And that it's going to be harder for some people than others, which, this reminder for our work is incredibly important. Every time we get reminded that people are different and something that's easier for one person is harder for the other, and that people are individuals, it's good for our brain. Because after you do this work for many years, you're going to start putting people in categories, because that's just how the mind works. I've seen this before, I know, and what you want to constantly be reminded is that even though we type people, right, vata, pitta, kapha, we do it, right, even in this training, that people are different, and that their possibilities in any given day are going to be different based on that. So that's what I like about these sutras. And then 123, the end of spiritual practice is only attained by placing oneself in the Lord, which is this concept of asvara pranidhanam. So what this is pointing us towards, I think, is that all roads require asvara pranidhanam, which is surrender. All effort, right, and point of view, right, all this work must be matched with some concept of surrender. There has to be some idea that I can't control everything. This idea of it's just the way it is, or if someone's more devotional, it's in God's hands. But this idea that ourselves, and especially our ego, is not the master of every single thing is incredibly important, right, for any healing process. So we have all this work we do, sort of like the practice concept I was saying earlier. We have all this practice so we can receive grace. We have all this work, right, and it has to be coupled with, I've done the work, and now I surrender to what happens. And when we surrender, as many of you I'm sure know, things go a lot more smoothly. Then we move to, I think, the next useful sutras here are 127, 128, and 129. That's 127, the sound devoting that self is the eternal Om, which manifests the grace of the design presence. By constantly repeating that sacred sound with great respect and love, and reflecting upon its meaning, one attains spiritual wealth. And from that practice arises the attainment of inward directed consciousness, and also obstacles to success disappear. What is important here is that chanting and reflection upon the meaning of the chants moves our attention inward. And then this inward awareness reduces the obstacles to our sense of peace and connection with our larger self and larger awareness. So in the sutras, they're specifically talking about Om, right, containing all aspects of vibration, which are the building blocks of the universe. So it's reminding us that chanting is a technology that can change our experience and align us with spirit. So these are in here. Patanjali could have talked about a lot of different things, and these are the things he chose to talk about, which makes this text so brilliant. And from a Western point of view, especially in therapeutic contexts, even I will often sort of not really go for some of the chanting, which we're going to be learning soon, technology, right, to help people. And then, of course, every time I do, I'm always amazed at how well it works. This is important to ponder because to truly understand yoga therapy, we need to personally understand why meditation and surrender can help heal. And even though it's totally and completely marvelous and stunning and amazing, right? It is not fantasy and it's not magic. So let me say that one more time because we're ending on this thought, and if you take nothing else from this lecture, it's important. We need to personally understand how meditation and surrender can heal. Because once you understand that, you'll be able to help people more, and you'll be able to see the openings for them, right? Because you've seen them in yourself. What's really important is to understand how that is so amazing and so different than magical thinking, which, to be honest, there's a lot of alternative healing in this world that's based on this magical thinking concept, which I personally have problems with. So, because it doesn't really work. Your practice should be, hopefully, infused, right, by Patanjali's advice here. The main thing is to, I would suggest, is to make these Yoga Sutras part of a daily practice and allow them to sort of shape and guide your thinking. It's an easy thing to do in small pieces, and I don't believe you have to do a super intense study of the sutras to get their benefit. I think what's most important is that you're constantly infused. And my personal experience has been that even when I believe I understand something, if I put them down and come back to them a year later, I realize, in a way I've fallen off the wagon mentally. So it keeps us on the path. So I hope that's helpful. Hope it's useful. I hope it's interesting. And